7 months ago, my brother vanished without a trace. Last night, I found an email from him, sent from coordinates inside the forest. I'm a ranger in Olympic National Park. The knock came just after midnight. 3 sharp raps against the wood. Deliberate, evenly spaced. Too precise to be the wind. I froze at my desk, pen still in hand. The cabin was silent except for the low hum of the heater and the faint hiss of rain on the windows. I'd been awake for hours, rereading the same line in my report over and over, my mind lost somewhere between exhaustion and dread. When the sound came again, 3 knocks, the exact same rhythm, I felt something cold twist deep inside me. No one should have been out there. Not here, not in this part of Yosemite, not at this hour. I rose slowly, every movement heavy, careful. My flashlight sat on the counter beside my radio, but the radio had been dead for days, static only. The generator out back had enough fuel for lights and heat, but the signal tower had gone down after last week's storm. Outside, the forest waited, endless, black, and dripping with fog. The knocks came a third time, louder now, more insistent. "Who's there?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. Silence. I reached for my rifle, leaning near the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then came a voice, thin, ragged, and trembling through the wood. "Ethan!" The sound hit me like a punch. I hadn't heard that voice in 7 months. "Ryan?" I whispered. No answer, just the faint creak of the porch boards outside, as if someone had stepped back into the fog. I didn't open the door, not yet. Instead, I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside a fraction of an inch. Rain streaked the glass. Beyond the reflection of my own pale face, I could barely make out the shapes of the pines bending in the wind. But there, between 2 trunks, was a figure. Tall, still, watching. The beam of my flashlight cut through the rain, and for a second, I saw a face. It was Ryan's, pale, hollow-eyed, dripping with water. Then the light flickered, and he was gone. The forest swallowed him whole. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the desk. Ryan had gone missing 7 months ago in these same woods. The search teams had found nothing. No gear, no footprints, no trace of him anywhere. After the second week, they'd called it off. I hadn't. I'd spent every spare day combing the ridges and valleys, chasing rumors, talking to hikers, following any lead that sounded even remotely possible. But he was gone. Everyone told me to move on. And yet, tonight he'd just knocked on my door. The story truly begins there, not 7 months ago when Ryan disappeared, but that single night when I saw his face again. At sunrise, I searched the area around the cabin. The rain had washed away everything. No footprints in the mud, no signs of anyone passing through. But something felt off about the air. Too still, too heavy, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I tried the radio again. Static. I tried my cell. No signal, not even a flicker. The logical part of me, the trained ranger, told myself I was overtired. Maybe it was just a trick of the fog, the storm, the half-dreaming mind that comes from weeks of insomnia. But deep down, I knew better, because an hour later, when I opened my laptop, there was an unread email waiting in my inbox. The sender, Ryan Cole. The timestamp, 2:03 a.m., less than 10 minutes after the knock on the door. The subject line was simple: "I'm alive." I didn't breathe as I opened it. The message itself was short. Just a few lines written in Ryan's clipped, matter-of-fact tone. "I'm alive. Don't call anyone. Don't trust anyone. Meet me where it started." No coordinates, no details. Just that. The email's signature data showed something impossible. No traceable IP, no route through known servers, as if it had come from inside a dead network. I checked the timestamp again. 2:03 a.m., the same time the wind had slammed the porch door. I sat there, staring at the words until the morning light filled the cabin. Where it started, he could only mean one place. The old trailhead near Cathedral Creek, where we'd taken our first camping trip as kids, long before our father died. It was deep in the northern valley, off the main routes, mostly closed to the public after landslides last year. I shut the laptop and rubbed my eyes. The smart thing to do was contact my supervisor, report a possible hoax, let the Park Service handle it. But Ryan wasn't just a missing hiker. He was my brother, and he was telling me not to trust anyone. That was how I ended up in the ranger station storage room an hour later, pulling gear off the shelves. Rope, flares, rations, and my father's old compass, the one he'd given Ryan before his last trip. The morning fog was thick when I stepped outside. The world felt muted, wrapped in gray silence. No birds, no rustling branches, not even the usual drip of melting snow from the roof. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears until it feels alive. As I loaded my gear into the truck, I caught sight of something carved into the wood of the porch railing. A small symbol, roughly cut as if done in haste. A circle with an arrow through it. Ryan's mark. He'd been here. My pulse spiked. For the first time in months, the grief that had weighed me down like stone began to burn into something else. Purpose. I climbed into the truck and started the engine. The tires crunched over the wet gravel as I turned onto the narrow service road that wound north through the trees. I didn't know what I would find. Maybe a man who'd lost his mind. Maybe something worse. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had taken Ryan, it wasn't finished with us, and I wasn't leaving this forest until I found the truth. If you've ever lost someone, truly lost them, you'll understand why I went back. It wasn't courage. It wasn't duty. It was something primal, the kind of pull you can't reason away. The kind that drags you into the dark, no matter how much you want to stay in the light. That's how every horror story begins, isn't it? With love dressed up as bravery. And maybe that's what this is. A love story. Just not the kind anyone survives. But before I tell you what I found out there, before I show you what really happened to Ryan Cole, do me one favor. If you're still here, listening, watching, wondering where this goes, hit subscribe. That's what keeps this channel alive. That's what keeps me telling stories like this. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about death, family, and the forest itself. The drive north was long, narrow, and silent. A low fog clung to the road, softening the outlines of the trees into ghostly shapes. My wipers scraped rhythmically across the windshield, the only sound in an otherwise breathless morning. I had made this drive 100 times before, but today it felt different, as if the forest were watching, waiting for me to reach its heart. The truck's headlights barely pierced through the gray. To my right, the valley dropped off sharply into a tangle of cedar and granite. To my left, the ridge loomed, lined with pines as tall as cathedrals. I kept my eyes on the road, but couldn't shake the feeling of movement in the trees. Not animals, not the usual deer or coyotes, but something following, pacing me from the woods. At mile marker 27, I pulled off onto a maintenance road leading toward Cathedral Creek. The gate was chained, the old park sign half buried under mud, trail closed for erosion control, authorized personnel only. I'd written that sign myself 2 years ago after a rock slide buried half the path. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was colder here, my breath fogged as I tightened the straps on my pack. The only sound was the slow trickle of water down the slope. Melting snow feeding the creek below. This was where it started. The same trailhead where Ryan and I had first camped as kids. The same ridge he'd used as a waypoint in his last message, before he vanished. The ground squelched under my boots as I followed the overgrown trail. Branches reached low like arms trying to pull me back. Each step deeper into the forest felt heavier, as though the air itself thickened the farther I went. It took less than an hour to reach the ridge overlook. From there, Yosemite unfolded in layers of mist and color. Gray cliffs, green valleys, and thin ribbons of rivers glinting like silver. The view was beautiful, overwhelming even, but it felt wrong. Something was missing. No birds, no squirrels, no sound of life at all. Just the faint, unending hum of the wind moving through the canyon. I knelt to catch my breath, brushing damp needles from my pants. That's when I saw it, carved into a fallen log beside the trail. Half hidden under moss, a circle with an arrow through it. Ryan's mark, the same symbol from my porch railing. I touched the carving, the grooves deep and fresh. He had been here recently, days ago, maybe even hours. "Ryan," I said softly, as if the trees could carry the word to him. No answer. Only the creak of branches high above. I followed the marks. Each one appeared roughly 100 yards apart. On rocks, bark, even on a rusted metal sign that used to mark the border between trail sections. It was as if Ryan had left a breadcrumb trail, knowing I'd come. But to what? At noon, I stopped near the creek to eat. The water was clear, running fast over smooth stones. Ryan and I had swum here as kids back when the world was simple. I could almost hear his laughter bouncing off the cliffs. As I knelt to refill my bottle, something caught the light at the bottom of the stream. I reached into the icy water and pulled it free, a metal lens cap. Engraved on the back were the initials RC scratched by hand. I closed my fist around it, heart pounding. This was it, proof he'd been here. But if he'd left a trail and a clue, why hadn't he returned home? Why send an email instead of calling? And why that message? Don't trust anyone. The questions kept circling as I moved upstream. 2 miles later, I reached a narrow pass where the forest thickened into a tunnel of pine. The air grew cooler. Shadows pooled between the trunks, even though the sun was high. Every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity, or love, kept me moving. Halfway through the pass, my boot hit something hollow. I knelt and brushed aside wet leaves. Beneath them was a small, weathered notebook bound in leather. The initials on the front matched the lens cap. RC. My throat tightened. I flipped through the pages carefully. Most of the writing was smudged, washed away by rain, but fragments remained. Jagged, frantic sentences written in Ryan's handwriting. The ground isn't what it seems. They listen through the roots. Light doesn't work here at night. If I don't come back, tell Ethan not to follow. The last page ended mid-sentence. I didn't realize how hard I was breathing until I tasted blood at the back of my throat. The woods seemed to lean closer as if listening. That was when I heard it. Faint, distant, a voice drifting through the trees. "Ethan!" It came from somewhere ahead, muffled by fog. "Ryan?" No response. The voice came again, a little louder, still warped by distance. "Ethan, help me!" It was him. It had to be. I broke into a run, crashing through branches, slipping over rocks. My pack thudded against my back. The voice seemed to move as I ran, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just out of reach. After 10 minutes, I stumbled into a small clearing. The air was thick with mist. In the center stood a single tree, a massive sequoia split by lightning, its trunk blackened and hollow. The voice came again, from inside the tree this time. "Ethan!" I raised my flashlight, shining it into the charred opening. Nothing, just darkness that seemed deeper than the shadows should allow. Then something moved inside, a flicker, a hand maybe, pale and trembling. I stepped back, heart pounding. "Ryan?" The light sputtered once, twice, and died. The voice whispered one last time, softer now, almost tender. "You shouldn't have come." The air around me dropped 10 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in white clouds. I heard a low hum under the ground, like distant machinery or something alive shifting in the earth. And then, silence. Total, perfect silence. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before I finally turned and ran. When I reached my truck hours later, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove until I reached the ranger station. Only when I stopped did I realize I still had the notebook in my hand. The last line I'd read kept replaying in my mind. "Tell Ethan not to follow." He must have written that right before disappearing. Maybe he'd seen something that made him want to warn me away. But I was already too deep in it now. If Ryan was alive, I was going to find him, and if he wasn't, then I'd find whatever had taken him. I stared out at the forest as dusk bled into night. The pines swayed softly, dark silhouettes against a purple sky. Somewhere out there, in that endless maze of trees, my brother was waiting, or something wearing his voice. Either way, I wasn't done, not yet. The ranger station felt smaller when I returned that night, like the walls had shifted closer while I was gone. I closed the door behind me, locked it out of habit, and leaned against the counter trying to steady my breathing. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the old shutters. The forest never truly slept, but tonight it felt restless. I set Ryan's notebook on my desk under the lamplight. The leather cover glistened with moisture, and the edges were dark with dirt. I flipped through it again, forcing myself to slow down this time. Between the smeared words and torn pages, something began to emerge. Coordinates, scrawled in shaky ink across a corner of one page. 37.7455 punt 19,5883 W. That was deep inside the restricted zone, a place known among rangers as the Red Sector, an old research area the park had closed years ago after a landslide. Officially, it was unsafe. Unofficially, everyone avoided it because of the stories. Unexplained animal deaths, hikers who heard their names whispered by the wind, light anomalies. I'd brushed off those reports before, but now they felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. I grabbed the park map from the wall and traced the coordinates with my finger. They landed near a narrow gorge not far from Cathedral Creek, about 6 miles north from where I'd found the notebook. If that was where Ryan had gone, I needed to see it. But I couldn't do it alone, not safely. I reached for the radio and turned the dial. Static. I adjusted the antenna. Still nothing. The storm had crippled the communications tower last week. I was cut off from the rest of the Rangers until repairs came through. A strange calm washed over me. It was just me now. Me, the forest, and whatever secret it was hiding. At dawn, I packed again. Heavier gear this time, extra flares, climbing rope, a small drone camera I used for search and rescue, and my father's old revolver. Not standard issue for a park ranger, but the weight of it at my side made me feel less alone. The forest was washed clean after the night's rain. Mist drifted low over the ground like smoke. Every step stirred the scent of wet pine and earth. I followed an unmarked service trail north, then cut across a ridgeline toward the gorge. For hours I saw nothing but trees. But around midday, the forest changed. The pines grew wider, older, giants that had stood for centuries. The ground beneath them was bare, covered only in thick moss. Even the air felt heavier, harder to breathe. And then I found the first anomaly, a circle of stones, perfectly shaped, perfectly aligned, each about the size of a human head. Inside the circle, the soil was black, not burned but charred as if something had leached the color out of it. I crouched to take a closer look. The stones were warm. Not from the sun. The light hadn't reached this part of the valley yet. Warm from within. I pulled a small thermometer from my pack and placed it on the ground. 96 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't possible. The soil around it was normal, cool, and damp. But this circle, it was alive, with heat. I marked the coordinates and took several photos before moving on. The air felt thicker now, charged with static. My hair lifted slightly at the edges, as if electricity moved through the ground. Half a mile later, I found another circle, then another, each one perfectly spaced apart, like markers leading somewhere. By the fourth circle, I was sweating despite the cold. My instinct screamed to turn around, but the trail kept pulling me forward. Finally, the trees opened up into a clearing, small and perfectly round. I stopped at the edge. My breath caught halfway. In the center stood a wooden tripod, maybe 7 feet tall, made of 3 rough-cut logs lashed together. Something hung from the middle, a metal lantern still faintly glowing. The sight made my stomach twist. The lantern was one of ours, Park Service issue, stamped with the department's insignia, and tied to one of the tripod legs was a piece of torn fabric, blue nylon, Ryan's jacket. I approached slowly, my boots sinking into the spongy ground. The glow inside the lantern pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. When I reached for it, the light flickered, and then died. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavier than before. I scanned the perimeter of the clearing. The moss here was disturbed, a faint trail of boot prints leading away toward the far side. I crouched, tracing them with my hand. The tread matched Ryan's hiking boots exactly, but the prints didn't lead away. They circled the clearing several times, overlapping, looping, doubling back, and then just stopped. No trail out, no final direction, as if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. I turned back toward the lantern, and that's when I saw something glinting near its base, a small silver pendant half buried in the moss. I brushed off the dirt and froze. It was Ryan's, the one he always wore around his neck, a tiny compass encased in glass, cracked but still functional. The needle spun wildly as I held it, turning in jerky circles. Then it stopped, pointing straight behind me. I whipped around, raising my flashlight. Nothing, just trees and fog. But for the first time since I'd entered the forest, I was sure, absolutely sure, I wasn't alone. I set up camp on higher ground that night, a small plateau overlooking the clearing. I built a low fire, barely enough for light, and checked the drone battery. It had a 20-minute flight window, enough to scan the area from above. At 10:17 p.m., I launched it. The feed on my tablet showed the drone rising through the canopy, the clearing shrinking below. Everything looked normal at first, the trees forming an unbroken ocean of green and shadow. But when I adjusted the thermal mode, something appeared. A heat signature. Not one, dozens. Small circular spots glowing faintly beneath the surface like embers buried under ash. They formed a rough spiral pattern radiating outward from the clearing. Each one pulsed in sync, slow, rhythmic, alive. The circles I'd found earlier weren't random. They were part of something larger, something that covered this entire stretch of forest like a web. As I zoomed in, a flicker of movement crossed the screen, a shape, human-sized, standing at the edge of the clearing, looking up toward the drone. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone approach. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't signal, just stood there, perfectly still. I tried to zoom closer. The image distorted, static tore across the feed. Then the screen went black. The drone fell silent above the trees. I heard it crash somewhere in the dark, and in the silence that followed from down below in the clearing, came a sound that made my blood turn cold. 3 sharp knocks, the same rhythm as the night before, on wood, like someone or something knocking from beneath the ground. The knocks echoed through the clearing like a heartbeat. 3 deliberate strikes, a pause, then 3 more. They weren't echoes of falling branches or woodpeckers. They were patterned, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep beneath the ground. I killed the fire instantly, crouched low, and listened. The forest had gone completely still again, the kind of silence that tightens around your lungs. Then, faintly, the knocks returned, farther away this time, moving north through the earth like something tunneling below. I forced myself to breathe evenly, counting the seconds between each sound. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. A message, maybe. A warning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake with the revolver across my knees, the cracked compass glinting beside me in the fire's last light. The needle twitched every time the knocks came, as if magnetized by whatever was moving under the ground. At dawn, I packed quickly and made my way toward where the sound had gone. The forest floor sloped down into a narrow ravine, the ground soft and spongy beneath my boots. The fog clung thickly to the trees. Each step forward felt heavier, as though the air itself was resisting my movement. Half a mile later, I found the drone, or what was left of it. It had crashed in a tangle of roots, its frame bent and scorched, the lens shattered. The battery compartment was cracked open, wires exposed and blackened, like something had shorted it mid-flight. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. Near the wreck, pressed into the mud, were footprints, bare feet, large, human, and fresh. The prints led deeper into the ravine. Where the fog grew darker, thicker, almost oily, I followed carefully, my hand on the revolver. Every few yards I paused and listened. No birds, no insects, just the faint trickle of water somewhere far below and the echo of my own breathing. The ravine narrowed until I was walking single file between walls of stone slick with moisture. The smell changed too. Damp earth mixed with something faintly metallic like rust or blood. That's when I saw it. At the base of a fallen pine, half hidden under leaves, was a camera, Ryan's old Nikon, the same one he'd taken on every expedition. My throat tightened as I picked it up. The casing was cracked, lens shattered, but the memory card slot was intact. I slipped the card into a plastic sleeve and pocketed it. And then I saw the tripod, not the wooden one from before. A metal one snapped in half, lying near the rocks. One leg bent, the other speared into the ground like a stake. Something was impaled on the broken edge, a piece of fabric, blue nylon, Ryan's jacket again. It was torn and crusted with dirt, but this time there was blood on it, dried, brown, old. My hands shook as I stuffed it into my pack. The air had turned colder, the fog pressed closer, heavy and unnatural, muffling sound in every direction. I turned to retrace my steps, and froze. A shadow was standing at the mouth of the ravine. Tall, still, it wasn't moving, but I could feel it looking at me. "Ryan?" My voice cracked. No answer. The shadow tilted its head slightly, and then it stepped back into the mist and was gone. I stood there for what felt like minutes, gun drawn, pulse thundering. Nothing. Just the trees and fog again. Finally, I forced myself to move. Fast, I climbed out of the ravine, following the compass, even though its needle spun erratically. By the time I reached level ground again, the fog had thinned, and the morning sun filtered through in streaks of pale gold. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. When I reached my truck, the door was open. I stopped dead. I knew I'd locked it before leaving camp. The seat was wet, rainwater maybe, or something else. And on the passenger seat, resting neatly atop the map of Yosemite, was a piece of paper, a page torn from Ryan's notebook. Same handwriting, same ink, but this one was fresh. "You're close. Stop digging. They don't like the noise." No signature. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just the forest, silent and watching. I got into the truck and slammed the door shut, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The engine started on the first turn. The radio came alive with static, and for a split second, through the static, I heard something. A voice. Faint but unmistakable. My name. Ethan. Then it cut out. Back at the station, I laid everything on the desk. The camera, the lens cap, the compass, the notebook, and the blood-stained fabric. All of it real, tangible proof that Ryan had been alive. And maybe still was. I popped the memory card from the camera into my laptop. The first few files were corrupted, blank gray screens with static hiss. But then one video opened. The timestamp, 7 months ago. Ryan's face filled the frame. He looked gaunt, exhausted. Dirt streaked his cheeks. The video was shaky. Recorded by hand. He whispered into the lens. "Day 12. The caves go deeper than we thought. There's movement down here. I heard voices, mine, yours, Dad's. They call from the dark. Don't come looking for me, Ethan. Please, don't." The footage glitched. The image warped and stretched. His face distorting, eyes turning black. Then came a sound, the same 3 knocks, and the video cut to black. I sat frozen, my hands cold on the keyboard. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was rolling back in, dark clouds gathering over the ridges. I copied the file to my hard drive, closed the laptop, and leaned back in my chair. Every instinct told me to leave it there, to turn in the evidence, to let the Park Service handle it. But logic couldn't erase what I'd seen in that clearing, or what I'd heard under the ground. If Ryan was trapped somewhere, or if something had taken his place, I had to know. The last thing he'd said in that video echoed through my head. "Don't come looking for me," but I'd already gone too far to stop now. But that night, I didn't sleep. The storm hit just after midnight, rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the pines. And then, over the noise, came 3 knocks on the door. Slow, heavy, deliberate, the exact rhythm I'd heard before. I raised the flashlight, heart pounding, and stepped closer. Outside, the wind roared, the rain slanted across the porch. Then, faintly, a voice. "Ethan, open the door." I hesitated. The voice came again, louder this time, clearer. "Ethan, it's me." Ryan. Every rational thought screamed that it wasn't possible, but love makes you irrational. My hand shook as I reached for the lock. I turned it slowly. The metal clicked. And from the other side, something whispered, not with Ryan's voice, not with any human voice, just one word. "Closer." I stepped back instantly, heart thundering, and the knocking stopped. When I finally dared to look through the window, there was no one there, just a single wet footprint on the porch, bare, human, facing toward the door. That was the last night I felt safe in Yosemite, because the next morning the footprint was gone, but the compass on my desk had moved. It pointed directly toward the North Valley, toward the place where Ryan had vanished, and I knew then, without any doubt, that I was going back, not as a ranger, as a brother. As a man who needed to know what really waited in those woods, above the ground and below it. The rain had stopped by morning, but the forest still wept. Water dripped from every pine needle, collecting in the soft mud outside the ranger station. The air smelled sharp, ozone, wet bark, something faintly metallic that didn't belong. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the knocking, the whisper, that single word. Closer. The footprint on the porch was gone, washed away by the storm. but the memory of it clung to me like smoke. The compass lay on my desk, the cracked glass still fogged from the night before. Its needle twitched constantly as if caught between two magnetic fields. But one thing hadn't changed. It still pointed north. Toward the place Ryan disappeared. I packed what I could in silence. My hands moved automatically. Rope, food, spare batteries, my revolver, and Ryan's notebook sealed inside a plastic bag. I'd written a note for the station log before leaving. Field patrol, private section, back within 48 hours. Do not follow. I left it unsigned. The forest greeted me like an old adversary. Beautiful, vast, and uncaring. Sunlight cut through the trees in streaks of gold, but beneath the canopy it was still dim, almost green. Every sound carried too far. A bird call, a branch cracking, the soft tread of my boots on damp soil. For the first 2 miles, nothing happened. The world felt normal. Then the static began. It came from the radio, clipped to my vest. Faint at first, just a soft hiss under the wind. I turned the dial, expecting the usual ranger chatter. Instead, a voice came through, not clear, not human, just one word drawn out and warped. Ethan. I froze. The voice was low, distorted by static, but the tone, the rhythm, was Ryan's. "Ryan," I said into the mic, my throat tight. "Ryan, is that you?" The hiss deepened, turned into a low hum that vibrated through the radio casing. Then silence. I tapped the side of the radio. No signal. The display flickered, a single red line scrolling across the screen. Then it went dead. I kept walking, but the sound haunted me. Not because I thought Ryan was calling, but because whatever that voice was, it had learned him perfectly. Around noon, I reached the edge of the North Valley, a place even veteran rangers avoided. The terrain here was rough, full of deep sinkholes and caves formed by underground rivers. The map labeled it simply as Geological Anomaly Zone. The ground was uneven and pocked with small depressions. I crouched to check one and realized it wasn't a sinkhole. It was a footprint, massive, twice the size of a man's, pressed deep into the soil as if whatever made it weighed tons. Each print was spaced about 12 feet apart. Something that big should have left broken branches or crushed brush, but the trail was perfectly clean. The forest here seemed untouched, too untouched. I followed the trail for half a mile until it ended abruptly at a wall of stone. A sheer cliff face rose in front of me, smooth and wet, the surface marked by strange dark veins that shimmered faintly in the light. At first, I thought it was mineral. Then one of the veins pulsed, just once, like a heartbeat. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the moss. My flashlight caught movement behind the stone, shadows shifting beneath the rock itself, as if something alive was moving inside. The compass went wild. The needle spun in circles, clicking against the glass. I forced myself to breathe. This was geology, I told myself. Some weird optical illusion caused by water, pressure, heat. Anything but what it looked like. Still, I took a soil sample. The black dust clung to the vial, faintly warm to the touch, just like the circles I'd found before. That's when my radio crackled again, a voice clearer this time. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan." I whipped around. The clearing was empty. The voice came again, louder, carrying through the trees like wind. "Go home." For a second, it didn't sound like Ryan. It sounded like me, my own voice. I yanked the batteries out of the radio and tossed it in the dirt. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The forest was absolutely still again. No wind, no birds, no movement, just the sound of my own breathing. I picked up the radio. It was cold, too cold. Frost rimed the metal edges even though the day was warm. And then I saw them, 3 small stones arranged in a circle near the base of the cliff, perfectly aligned. I crouched down, careful not to disturb them. Beneath the stones, the ground looked darker, almost hollow. I brushed away the moss, revealing what looked like a fissure about the width of my arm. A faint, warm breeze came from it, and underneath that breeze, a smell. Sweet at first, almost floral, then rotten. I dropped the moss back over the hole and backed away. Whatever was breathing down there, it wasn't human. By dusk, I'd made camp near the creek. The water was high from the storm, rushing fast and loud enough to drown out smaller sounds, a comfort I didn't realize I needed until I sat down. I ate in silence, checked my compass again. The needle had finally settled, north-northwest, deeper into the valley. I lit the fire low and reviewed Ryan's notebook one more time. Between his half-legible notes, I found something new. A sketch of a circular chamber with symbols along the walls. In the center, a dark pit labeled only the mouth. My stomach turned. Beneath it, one final sentence. It doesn't end where you think it does. That was when the knocking started again. Not from the forest this time. From underneath me. 3 slow strikes against the ground. I scrambled to my feet, flashlight in hand. The knocks repeated, louder, closer, as if something massive was moving below. The water in the creek trembled. And then faintly, I heard my name again, whispered through the soil. Ethan! I pointed my light at the ground, expecting to see roots, rocks, anything. Instead, the earth bulged, just slightly, like something was breathing below. The bulge in the earth pulsed again, a slow rise and fall, almost rhythmic, like lungs under the soil. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Every instinct told me to run, to leave my gear and sprint until the ranger station was just a memory, but something deeper. The same stubborn loyalty that had driven me back into these woods held me in place. Ryan, I whispered, my voice barely carried over the rushing creek. If you're down there, if that's you. Silence. Then, faintly, a sound answered. Not a voice, but the scrape of movement. Soil shifting, something was pushing upward. I took a step back, raising my revolver. The ground split open just a few inches at first. Mud and moss peeled back like skin, revealing black soil beneath. I could see something glinting inside the crack. Metal? Bone? I couldn't tell. And then a hand broke through. It wasn't human, not entirely. It had 5 fingers, yes, but the skin was gray and translucent, stretched tight over something too angular to be bone. The fingers twitched, flexed, and then went still. I stumbled backward, breath caught in my throat. The revolver shook in my grip. Don't! A voice hissed. It came from the hand. I froze. The fingers curled, pointing up toward me like they were trying to grab hold of the air. Don't, it said again, louder this time. My brother's voice. Ryan? A pause, then softer. Don't dig. I crouched, still keeping my distance. Where are you? The hand twitched once, twice, then withdrew back into the earth. The soil closed behind it as if nothing had disturbed it at all. The air went dead still. No sound, no breeze. Only the faint hum beneath my boots, fading away. I didn't move for nearly 10 minutes, afraid that even breathing too loud would wake it, whatever it was. When I finally found the courage to pack up, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely tie the knots on my bag. The compass needle was spinning again, faster than before. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every shadow beyond the firelight looked like it was moving. I kept my back to a large rock and watched the ground, afraid that hand, or something worse, might rise again. By morning, I'd decided to head back. Not to the ranger station, not yet, but to the site of the cliff where I'd found those pulsing veins in the rock. I had to see it again to prove to myself that the night hadn't just been a product of exhaustion and fear. The hike back took longer than it should have. The forest felt denser now, like the trees had shifted overnight. Landmarks I recognized from the day before, a twisted pine, a fallen log, a boulder shaped like a bear's head, were gone, or in different places. It didn't make sense. The sun was high, but light barely reached the forest floor. The air was heavy, humid, and thick with the scent of wet metal. When I finally reached the cliff, it looked different too. The dark veins were still there, but now they pulsed visibly, a slow, rhythmic glow, faint but real. I pressed my hand against the stone. Warm. The warmth grew stronger, vibrating faintly against my palm. And then I heard it, a low hum, almost like a voice buried in the rock. Words I couldn't make out, whispering just beyond understanding. I leaned closer, trying to catch them. That's when I saw it, a symbol carved into the stone, a perfect circle intersected by a single downward line. The same mark Ryan had carved on that log, only now it was glowing. The hum deepened, resonating in my chest. My heartbeat synced with it, slow and heavy. I tried to step back, but my hand stayed glued to the stone. The warmth turned into heat, too hot, burning. I yanked my arm away, gasping. My palm was red, the outline of the circle faintly branded into my skin. The hum stopped. The forest fell silent again. I stumbled backward until I hit the ground. My vision swam for a second, the world tilting sideways. When it steadied, something caught my eye near the base of the cliff, a narrow gap between two slabs of stone. A cave. It hadn't been there yesterday. I crawled closer, shining my flashlight inside. The beam didn't reach far, just a few feet before the light dissolved into pitch black. But there was movement in that darkness, a shimmer like heat distortion, something alive. I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I set up a small motion camera at the entrance. Standard issue gear for tracking wildlife. I aimed it toward the opening, switched it on, and stepped back. If anything came out, I'd know. Then I marked the location on my GPS, though I wasn't sure why anymore. The coordinates didn't seem to mean much in this place. The compass spun uselessly. The GPS flickered like it was losing satellite contact even under open sky. I decided to head back toward the main trail before dark, but as I turned, something changed. The forest was darker, too dark. It was like a filter had dropped over my vision, leaching color from everything. The trees, the soil, even the sky. The temperature fell fast, the kind of sudden cold that hurts your teeth when you breathe. And then the voices started. Not whispers this time. Full sentences, clear as if spoken next to me. Ethan, help me. Come back. They came from every direction at once. Ryan's voice, my mother's, even my own. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head, vibrating through bone instead of air. Stop, I shouted. The voices went silent, all but one. A woman's voice, gentle, calm. You shouldn't be alone here, Ethan. I spun around. Someone was standing in the fog 10 feet away. A woman in a park ranger uniform, mid-30s, brown hair pulled back, her badge gleaming faintly. She looked familiar. Who? My throat closed. Who are you? She smiled faintly. I'm Officer Lynn, search and rescue. Her tone was calm, reassuring, the same way I spoke to lost hikers. I heard your distress signal, she said. We've been looking for you since yesterday. That made no sense. My radio had been dead since noon. Still, something about her presence, the quiet authority, the steady voice, made me want to believe her. You're not safe here, she said softly. Come with me. How did you find me? She paused, just for a heartbeat too long. Then she said, Your brother led us. Every nerve in my body went cold. I stepped back. Where is he? Her eyes flicked toward the cave behind me. Waiting. And then she smiled, wider, too wide. I raised my flashlight, and for the first time I saw her clearly. Her uniform wasn't wet despite the rain. Her boots didn't touch the ground, and where her shadow should have been, there was nothing. The light flickered, her face shifted, the smile split higher, past her cheeks, revealing rows of small, sharp teeth. "Come," she whispered. The flashlight died. The dark swallowed everything. I couldn't see my hands, the trees, not even the faint glow of the fog. Only the sound of my breathing filled the void, quick and sharp, echoing like I was trapped in a cave. "Ethan." Her voice drifted through the black. Calm. Too calm. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the flare gun strapped to my pack. My fingers shook as I yanked it free and fired blindly into the dark. The red flare screamed upward, exploding into a burst of crimson light that drenched the forest in blood-colored glow. For one horrifying second, I saw her. The woman, or whatever she was, hung suspended above the ground, her body elongated, limbs too thin, head tilted at an impossible angle. The smile hadn't faded. It had grown, stretching almost to her ears. Her eyes were black hollows that seemed to pull the light inward. She whispered something I couldn't understand, a sound like wind howling backward. The trees bent toward her voice. Then she dropped. I turned and ran. Branches clawed at my face as I tore through the undergrowth, slipping on wet moss and rocks. The flare light flickered behind me, painting everything in frantic flashes of red. Somewhere behind me I heard movement, fast, deliberate, closing in. I didn't dare look back. The forest seemed endless. The ground sloped downward, the soil soft and giving way underfoot. I didn't even notice the edge until it was too late. The earth collapsed beneath me. I fell. For a moment there was nothing but freefall. The roar of air, the flash of red light spinning wildly, then pain as I slammed into cold stone. My flashlight shattered, plunging me into darkness again. I lay there, gasping, testing my limbs. Nothing broken. Somehow I was alive. The revolver was gone, lost somewhere above. As my eyes adjusted, I realized where I'd landed. A cave, not a natural one. The walls were smooth, curved, almost sculpted. The floor was covered in that same black soil that radiated faint heat. The air shimmered faintly, bending light like heat off asphalt, and on the far wall faint symbols glowed, circles intersected by downward lines. Ryan's mark, over and over. My pulse pounded in my ears. I called his name once, twice, my voice bouncing off the stone. No answer. Then from deeper inside the cave, I heard footsteps. Slow, barefoot. I backed against the wall, squinting into the dark. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking with a strange stiffness, as if his joints didn't move right. It was Ryan. His clothes were torn, streaked with mud. His skin looked gray under the dim light, his hair matted and damp. But it was his face, my brother's face. "Ryan," my voice cracked. He smiled weakly. "You found me." For a heartbeat, everything inside me broke open. Relief, grief, disbelief, all tangled together. I took a step forward, but then I stopped. His smile didn't reach his eyes. They were empty, dark and glassy, reflecting no light at all. "What happened to you?" I whispered. He tilted his head. "I told you not to come. I got your message. I saw your notebook. I didn't send those." The words hit like a punch. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the glowing marks on the wall. "It uses them. It uses me." The air around us seemed to hum. The glow brightened, symbols pulsing in rhythm with his voice. "They call it the mouth," he said. "It listens through the roots. It mimics. It learns." Something deep in the cave groaned, a low, drawn-out sound that made the ground vibrate under my boots. Ryan stepped closer, his movements jerky, unnatural. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan." "I came to bring you home." He shook his head. Home isn't there anymore. The hum grew louder. The marks on the wall flared white. I could feel heat radiating from the stone. Ryan flinched, clutching his head. Ryan! I lunged forward. He grabbed my arm, and his skin was cold as marble. For an instant, his face flickered, his features shifting, stretching like a reflection in rippling water. Beneath the skin, something moved. "It's awake!" he rasped. "Run!" A deep crack split through the floor. Light poured out, not white or red, but something alive, a color I'd never seen before, both beautiful and wrong. The heat scorched the air. I stumbled back as the earth began to shake. Ryan turned toward the crack, his body convulsing as if pulled by invisible threads. His voice came out broken, layered with others, male, female, child, all speaking at once. "It remembers you, Ethan. It remembers us." The light grew blinding. I shielded my eyes, backing toward the tunnel. "Ryan!" He looked at me one last time, and for that moment it was really him. My brother, the same boy who used to chase fireflies by the creek, who laughed too loud, who believed the forest could talk. "Tell Dad I tried," he whispered. Then the ground swallowed him whole. The cave roared like a living thing. I turned and ran through the tunnel, my body moving on instinct. Rocks fell around me, heat licking at my back. The air tasted of metal and ash. When I burst out into the open, the forest was on fire, not with flames but with light. The trees glowed faintly from within, their roots pulsing like veins. I kept running. The light faded behind me as I climbed the ridge, lungs burning, every muscle screaming. When I finally reached the top and looked back, the valley was dark again, silent, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The brand on my palm, the circle and line, still burned faintly. The forest had let me go, for now. I reached the ranger station just before dawn, filthy, half delirious. I locked the door, collapsed in the chair, and stared at the compass. It was still spinning. On the desk beside it, the radio crackled to life, just static at first. Then a voice, faint and distant. "Ethan." My heart stopped. The voice was Ryan's, but there was something else underneath it, like a second tone buried within. "Don't run." The static cut out. Outside, the wind rose. And then came the knock, 3 times. Slow, deliberate, this time from inside the cabin wall. The first knock came from inside the west wall. Not loud, not frantic, steady. 3 precise beats like a code. I froze. The revolver sat on the table beside the compass. My hand went for it automatically, but I didn't move closer. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the storm's echo lingered in the valley, trapped between the cliffs like a ghost that refused to leave. Another knock. Same rhythm. "Ryan?" Nothing. Then faintly the sound of dragging. Slow, scraping, something heavy moving just behind the plaster. The cabin wasn't large. 1 room for the office, a cot in the back, and a crawl space under the floor for storage. I knelt, pressing my ear to the wall. The noise shifted, now coming from below. Something was in the crawl space. I unlatched the trapdoor and aimed the flashlight into the dark gap beneath the floorboards. The beam caught dust motes and cobwebs. Nothing else. Then movement. Something pale slid out of view. I swallowed hard and reached for the ladder, forcing myself down. The space smelled of earth and mildew. My boots sank slightly in the damp soil. The flashlight cut across wooden beams and supply boxes, and then stopped on a smear of mud across one crate. 3 parallel streaks, finger marks. They trailed toward the far wall where the foundation met rock. The soil there was disturbed, freshly turned. I crouched, brushing it aside. Underneath was a hole, small at first glance, the width of a dinner plate, but the deeper I looked, the less bottom it seemed to have. The beam of my flashlight vanished into blackness halfway down. A warm draft rose from it, carrying that same metallic scent I'd smelled in the valley. I leaned closer. Something glinted below. I reached in with my multi-tool, hooked it, and pulled it free, a rusted dog tag caked in mud. The name stamped on it made my stomach drop. Lynn M. Officer Lynn, the woman I'd seen in the woods. I staggered back, hitting my head on a beam. For a moment I just sat there, heart pounding, staring at the tag. She'd said she was from search and rescue. She'd said Ryan led her there, but she was already dead. The air shifted. I heard the faintest whisper rise from the hole. "Ethan!" I scrambled up the ladder, slammed the trapdoor shut, and shoved a crate over it. The compass on the desk spun violently. The radio crackled alive. Static. Then, between bursts, "You saw it. It remembers you." Under the root. The voice was layered. Ryan's tone underneath something else, deeper, older. I shut the radio off, but the static didn't stop. It seemed to leak from the walls themselves, the faint electrical hum seeping into the air. For the first time since this began, I considered leaving, driving straight down to the valley outpost, handing over my badge, and pretending I'd never seen any of this. But the dog tag changed everything. Lynn wasn't the first to vanish out here. I'd read those missing person reports before, hikers, scientists, even 2 rangers 20 years ago. None recovered. The official files blamed weather, terrain, hypothermia. But there'd been rumors, whole cave systems that didn't appear on maps, strange magnetic readings under Half Dome. I needed proof. I opened Ryan's notebook again. In the margins beside the sketch of the mouth, I noticed something I'd missed. Faint pencil notes around the drawing. Route A's entrance. Echo tests, responses at 24 Hz. Heat pockets, living tissue. Below that, a coordinate string, not the same as before. When I plotted it on the map, it landed inside an area labeled Restricted Research Zone, 1978. My father had once mentioned that zone, an abandoned seismic monitoring project. Tunnels drilled deep into the granite to study tremors. They'd sealed it off after an accident. If Ryan had gone down there, maybe he'd found something they'd left behind, or something they'd tried to bury. I grabbed my gear again. Fresh batteries, camera, rope, flares, the revolver. I hesitated at the trap door, listening. No sound, only the faint ticking of the clock. Still, I left the crate where it was. When I stepped outside, dawn was breaking, thin silver light cutting through the mist. The forest seemed calm again, innocent even. But the calm didn't fool me anymore. I hiked fast, following the compass north toward the coordinates. The path twisted through the pines, over fallen logs, slick with moss. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, the woods were empty. By mid-morning, I reached a ridge that overlooked a barren stretch of granite. No trees, just exposed stone and a rusted metal fence half swallowed by earth. Beyond it stood an old concrete entrance built into the cliff face, the words barely visible above the doorway. U.S. Geological Survey Station Number 12, 1978. The door hung slightly open. I approached slowly, revolver raised. The air inside smelling of dust and ozone. A rusted sign lay in the dirt. Danger, unstable tunnels, authorized personnel only. Inside, the tunnel sloped downward, swallowed by shadow. A single track ran along the floor. Rails for a small mining cart, maybe, leading deeper into the dark. I switched on my headlamp and stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My breath fogged the air. Behind me, the compass needle froze, pointing straight ahead, unwavering for the first time since all this began. I took that as a sign and went deeper. The tunnel swallowed me whole. The beam from my headlamp barely reached 20 feet ahead before fading into the dark. Dust drifted through the air like ash. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the concrete walls in slow, hollow beats. It smelled of rust and wet stone, the scent of something sealed away for too long. I kept one hand on the wall, tracing the rough texture. Pipes ran along the ceiling, old and corroded, dripping with condensation. Every now and then, a faint electrical buzz crackled through them, like the system still had a pulse. After 50 yards, the tunnel forked, one path blocked by a cave-in, the other descending deeper. A faded arrow painted on the wall pointed downward with a single word, Elab. I hesitated. Ryan's notes had mentioned seismic testing, not a lab, but the coordinates matched this place exactly. I adjusted my pack and moved on. The slope grew steeper, the air colder, the silence so complete that even the sound of my breathing felt too loud. Then came the hum. Soft at first, so low I thought it was just the echo of my steps. But it grew, vibrating through the floor, the same deep frequency I'd heard in the valley. I switched off my lamp for a moment. Total darkness pressed against my eyes, and still the hum continued. Somewhere ahead, faint orange light pulsed in time with it. Slow, steady, alive. When I turned the light back on, I saw markings along the wall. Not letters, not numbers. Symbols carved into the concrete in perfect circles, repeating in intervals. Each circle contained a smaller spiral inside, and each spiral pointed downward. Ryan's mark. He'd been here. The realization hit hard, not just as relief, but as dread. If he'd made it this far, why hadn't he come back out? At the bottom of the slope, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. My light swept across rows of rusted tables, shattered glass, overturned cabinets. This wasn't just a geological site. It had been a lab, a full research facility buried beneath the park. Old equipment lay scattered everywhere. Microscopes, chemical flasks, decayed paper charts. Faded posters still clung to the walls. USGS Experimental Division, Thermal Activity Unit. But it wasn't the lab that stopped me cold. It was the thing in the center of the room. A large circular pit, reinforced with steel, 10 feet across, descending straight down into blackness. Around its rim were metal braces connected to thick cables that disappeared into the ceiling. Someone had built this pit, and whatever it was meant to hold or contain had been alive. I approached slowly. My lamp beam caught a small sign bolted to the railing. Substratum access shaft. Level C authorized personnel only. Seismic instability beyond 300 FE. The metal looked warped, melted in places as if something hot had licked at it from below. I leaned over the edge, shining the light down. The beam didn't hit bottom, just like before. Endless black. A faint draft rose from the pit, carrying that same sweet, rotten smell. Then came the whisper. "Ethan!" I jerked back so fast my shoulder hit the railing. The voice came again, this time from deeper in the tunnel behind me. "You shouldn't be here." It was Ryan's voice. "Ryan?" I called out, my echo chasing itself through the chamber. "Ryan, talk to me." Footsteps answered, slow, deliberate, approaching from the shadows. I raised my flashlight. A figure stood just beyond the light's reach. Tall, thin, the same jerky movements as before. "Ryan?" The figure tilted its head. Then it stepped closer. It was wearing a ranger's jacket. Ryan's. But the thing inside that jacket wasn't my brother anymore. Its face was pale and translucent, features stretched too long as if molded from wax. The eyes, black voids rimmed with gray. Its mouth opened slowly, and the sound that came out was layered. Dozens of voices speaking in unison. "It remembers you." I backed toward the wall, fumbling for the revolver. It took another step forward, one hand reaching out. The same hand I'd seen in the ground the night before. Gray, veined, wrong. The revolver went off once, twice, deafening in the enclosed space. The figure staggered but didn't fall. The bullets hit, but no blood came. The holes in its chest simply closed, skin knitting together like wax melting under heat. Then it smiled. It's waiting. The hum deepened. The floor began to vibrate. Dust rained from the ceiling. I turned and sprinted toward the far exit. A secondary tunnel marked storage. The ground shook harder, the sound behind me growing louder, deeper, like something massive shifting beneath the concrete. I reached the tunnel and ducked inside, just as the chamber collapsed. The blast of air threw me forward, knocking the light from my head. I hit the floor hard, rolled, and scrambled back to my feet. The entrance behind me was gone, sealed by fallen rock. The hum faded again, replaced by something worse, breathing. Long, slow, inhuman breaths echoing from the dark ahead. I forced my light back on. The beam flickered, then steadied. The tunnel stretched on, narrow, curving downward. At the far end, something glowed faintly on the wall. Letters scrawled in black paint. "We woke it." I stared at the words until my light began to dim. Then, from somewhere deep in the tunnel, I heard a new sound. Not knocks, not whispers. Footsteps, soft, barefoot, coming closer. The footsteps stopped. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the curve of the tunnel, something waited. I held my breath, listening. The air felt thicker here, heavy like standing underwater. My flashlight's beam wavered, slicing through the dark and jerky arcs until it caught the glint of metal. A door, old, half-rusted, but still sealed tight with a wheel lock in the center. Above it, a small plaque read, "Sub-level archive, access restricted." I approached slowly. The air around the door shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. The metal was cold when I touched it, impossibly cold, as though it had been carved from ice. The footsteps started again, right behind me this time. I spun around, raising the revolver. The beam from my flashlight swept through the tunnel. Nothing. Only a low vibration through the floorboards, as if the rock itself were breathing. Enough. I turned the wheel lock. It screeched, stiff from years of rust, but it moved. I pulled the door open. The smell hit first, rot and something chemical, like antiseptic over old meat. Inside was a narrow corridor lined with glass chambers. Each one stood tall enough for a person, cables trailing from the top like veins. A dozen of them, maybe more, all connected by a central conduit that hummed with faint orange light. Inside the first chamber hung a body. At least, I thought it was a body. The skin looked translucent, like something halfway between human and insect. The shape was wrong. Arms too long, jaw dislocated. Its eyes were closed, lids thin as tissue. I stepped closer. Heart hammering. A metal plate was bolted to the base. Subject 04, W.R. Lynn. Officer Lynn again. Her dog tag burned in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring between the two. The name on the tag, the thing in the glass. The resemblance was undeniable. They'd been experimenting on her, on people. The next chamber held something smaller, curled, fetal, unmoving. The label read, Subject 07, Unknown DNA Sequence, H-Class. I forced myself to keep moving, past each frozen chamber, past each plaque. The numbers climbed, 09, 10, 11, until I reached the last one. It was empty. The glass was shattered from the inside. The plate at the base had been ripped halfway off, but I could still read what remained. Subject 13, R.N.D. Ryan. My knees nearly gave out. I pressed a hand to the wall to steady myself, my breath shaking. Ryan hadn't just found this place. He'd been part of it. The realization hit like a gunshot. He hadn't been searching for the creature. He'd been searching for himself. I leaned closer to the open chamber, studying the jagged edges of the glass. It wasn't broken outward. It was melted. The steel bolts were twisted, warped, as though something incredibly hot had forced its way through. That same low hum returned, vibrating through the metal floor, making the glass tremble. The conduit running through the middle of the room began to glow brighter, pulsing faster. Then the lights flickered on. Fluorescent tubes overhead crackled to life, one by one, illuminating the room in harsh white. The air shimmered with heat, and the hum deepened until I could feel it in my teeth. And then, from a speaker somewhere above, came a burst of static, followed by a voice. "If you're hearing this, you made it to level C." I froze. Ryan's voice. "My name is Ryan Daniels, field researcher, USGS experimental team. If you found this, the containment's already broken." His voice was flat but urgent, recorded long before whatever nightmare had unfolded here. In 1978, we drilled into something we thought was a hollow thermal cavity. It wasn't. The readings didn't match any seismic pattern. It was organic, resonating at frequencies we couldn't identify. We called it the root core. I looked around the room. Every cable, every wire led into the walls, feeding downward. It responded to vibration, to human speech. It mimicked. At first, we thought it was echo. Then it started using our own voices in return. The recording clicked, static swallowing half a sentence. 3 of us gone. Lynn volunteered, thought she could communicate. My throat tightened. The figure in chamber 04. "The entity learns through resonance," Ryan's voice continued. "It doesn't kill immediately. It studies. It reshapes what it absorbs. It can inhabit form, physical, vocal, even memory." He paused. "If you're my brother, Ethan, you need to leave this place. It's using me as a tether. It can reach through the connection between us." I staggered back from the console. He knew. He'd known I would come for him. "Whatever you do," the voice said, slower now, like it was straining to finish, "don't trust anything that wears my face." The recording ended in a high-pitched squeal that made me flinch. The lights flickered once more and then went out entirely. The hum rose again, louder than ever, shaking the floor. The glass chambers rattled, and from the open one, Ryan's chamber, something began to crawl out. At first, just a hand, pale, glistening, the veins glowing faintly orange. Then a shoulder, a head. Its skin was still forming, stretching tight over bone, like watching clay harden in real time. It turned toward me. The face was half-finished, features melting, shifting, trying to find shape. One eye formed first, blue, my brother's blue. It smiled with no lips. "Ethan," I fired once, the shot echoing off concrete, shattering one of the glass tanks. Fluid spilled across the floor. The creature staggered back, hissing, its mouth opening wider than humanly possible. The smell of ozone filled the air. I turned and ran for the exit, slipping on the wet floor, my boots splashing through that strange, glowing liquid. The hum turned into a roar. The whole sublevel shook as if the mountain itself were alive. As I reached the corridor, I glanced back once. The thing was standing upright now, fully formed, almost human, almost Ryan. "You can't hide from blood," it said. Then the lights went out again. Darkness. Only the sound of my own footsteps and the faint echo of my brother's voice following me up the tunnel. "You can't run from what you are." The tunnels shook so hard that the ceiling dust fell like snow. My headlamp flickered wildly, strobing flashes of concrete and panic. I ran blind through the darkness, my hands scraping along the wall just to know which way was forward. The revolver was gone, lost somewhere in the lab, when it stepped out of the chamber. I hit a turn too fast and stumbled, skidding to my knees. Behind me, the sound followed, wet, dragging footsteps, and that low hum that now felt like it was inside my skull. I forced myself up and ran harder. Ahead, a sliver of light cut through a crack in the tunnel wall. I squeezed through, tearing my jacket on jagged rock, and found myself in a maintenance shaft. narrow, vertical, lined with rusted ladders leading upward into blackness. A sign above the base read, "Access, Surface, Emergency Exit." I started climbing. The rungs were slick with moisture. Each movement echoed in the hollow shaft, mixing with the steady pulse of the hum below. I climbed until my arms burned, until my hands slipped from sweat and grime. Then I heard the voice again, faint, rising through the shaft after me. "Ethan, don't leave me again." I froze. For one heartbeat, the exhaustion and fear cracked something inside me. I wanted to believe it, that my brother was down there, hurt, afraid, reaching out like the boy who once shared a room with me, whispering ghost stories after lights out. But the rational part of me, the ranger, the one who survived in the wild because he trusted evidence over emotion, knew better. That wasn't Ryan. It was the thing that had studied him, memorized his voice, his heartbeat, his soul. I kept climbing. The hum grew angrier, the air vibrating. Then came the scream, not human, not mechanical, but something in between, a sound so sharp it rattled the bolts loose. The shaft quivered and a rush of air blasted upward, carrying the smell of iron and heat. Below, light flared, orange, alive. And the last thing I saw before it vanished was a hand reaching up the ladder after me, fingers bending the metal rungs like soft clay. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my shoulders. Above me, the ladder ended at a hatch sealed with a heavy lock. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice. The third time, it gave way with a metallic crack. Cold air hit my face, forest air damp with pine and dawn. I dragged myself out, rolling onto wet ground. The surface. I lay there for a moment, staring at the gray sky filtering through the trees. The hum was gone. The mountain was quiet again, like it had never happened. But quiet didn't mean safe. I pushed up, shaking, covered in dust and cuts, and looked back. The emergency hatch sat at the base of an old outcropping, half hidden by moss. Nothing about it suggested it led to an underground lab or a creature that could wear a man's face. It just looked like another forgotten relic swallowed by Yosemite. I staggered a few feet away before my knees gave out. My heart hammered against my ribs and I realized I was still holding Ryan's notebook, soaked through, the pages bleeding ink. I flipped it open. Half the entries were ruined, but one page remained legible, scrawled in dark pencil, the lines pressed so deep they cut through the paper. The root core isn't a creature, it's a doorway. We're the invitation. I read the line again and again until the words burned into my mind. Doorway, invitation, that thing in the pit it hadn't been trying to escape. It had been called, by them, by us. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was walking. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me down the slope toward the ranger station. Every sound in the forest felt amplified, the snap of branches, the distant call of crows, the way the wind whispered through the pines like faint voices saying my name. By the time I saw the station's outline through the trees, the sun was rising. Pale gold spilled across the valley, turning the mist into ribbons of fire. For a moment, it almost looked beautiful. Almost. I pushed through the door and collapsed into the chair by the desk. My hands shook so badly I could barely pour water from the canteen. When I looked up, the compass on the desk had stopped spinning. It was still pointing west, toward where I'd come from. Then it started moving again, slowly, deliberately, turning 180 degrees until it pointed at me. A voice behind me said, "You shouldn't have gone down there." I spun around, knocking over the chair. Standing in the doorway was Ryan. He looked just like he had before he disappeared. Clean uniform, calm expression, even the scar on his left brow. For a second, I almost believed it. Then I saw his shadow. It didn't match him. It bent the wrong way, stretching toward the compass, like a hand reaching for a heartbeat. "Ryan," I whispered. He smiled. "You look like you've seen a ghost." My mind raced. If I fired and it was him, but if it wasn't? He stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under his boots. "You shouldn't have interfered, Ethan. You were supposed to stay above." My hand inched toward the drawer, the emergency flare gun. "Where were you?" I asked. "In the dark," he said. "Listening. Learning." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Now it's your turn." I fired the flare gun. The red light exploded across the room, slamming into his chest. His body erupted in a burst of flame and ash, the smell of burning plastic filling the air. The shape shrieked, 1,000 overlapping voices screaming through one mouth, and then it was gone. Silence fell again. The flare burned out, leaving smoke curling up toward the ceiling. I fell to my knees, shaking. Every instinct told me to run, but there was nowhere to go, not until I understood what this was. I looked at the notebook again. A smaller piece of paper had been tucked between the last pages, one I hadn't noticed before. It was an old photograph, 2 men standing in front of the same mountain lab, smiling for the camera. One of them was my father. The other wore a USGS badge labeled Project Root Core, Supervisor R. Daniels, my grandfather. The caption on the back read, "Phase 1, Containment Established. Phase 2, Inheritance." My hands went cold. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. This had started with our family decades ago. The Root Core didn't find us. We built it. The photo burned into my mind. My grandfather's face, sharp features, same eyes as mine, smiling beside the sealed concrete door of that cursed tunnel. On the back, Phase 1, Containment Established. Phase 2, Inheritance. The word inheritance pulsed like a heartbeat behind my eyes. I sat at the ranger station's desk for what felt like hours, the forest outside fading from morning gold to gray drizzle. The radio hissed quietly beside me. I hadn't dared turn it off since the last time it spoke. Every sound in the cabin made me twitch. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the roof under wind, the faint hum of the old fridge in the corner. I couldn't tell what was normal anymore. Finally, I took the photograph and slipped it into my pocket. I needed answers, and there was only one place that might still have them. My father's old house. He'd retired years before I became a ranger, left the valley, and died in a so-called accident that I now realized might never have been an accident at all. His property sat 20 miles west, on the edge of Mariposa County, an old cabin he'd built after my mother passed. I packed what I could: the notebook, Ryan's tag, extra rounds for the revolver, my flare gun, and stepped into the rain. The drive down the mountain felt endless. The sky hung low, clouds sagging over the ridges like bruises. Every turn of the road seemed unfamiliar, even though I'd driven this route dozens of times. The compass on the dashboard twitched with every mile, as if reluctant to point me anywhere. By dusk, I reached the property. The house sat half hidden by overgrown trees, the porch sagging under years of neglect. The wind had stripped the paint to bare wood. The lock was still broken from when the sheriff had forced entry after the accident. Inside, the air smelled of dust, oil, and something older. Like time itself had been trapped in these walls. My father had always been private, but now I realized he hadn't just been secretive. He'd been hiding something. I found the study exactly how I remembered it. Neat, meticulous, with every book and tool in its place. But when I pulled back the rug, the floor creaked hollow beneath my boots. A hidden compartment. I pried it open with my knife and found a small wooden chest inside, its brass hinges tarnished but intact. Inside were photographs, letters, when in a stack of old reel-to-reel tapes labeled Project Root Core Daniel's Archive. My hands trembled as I picked one up. A handwritten note sat on top, in my father's blocky handwriting. "Ethan, if you ever find this, I failed. Don't go back to the core, you'll only wake it again." I swallowed hard and loaded the first tape into the player that sat on his desk, praying the machine still worked. It crackled, then hissed alive. A voice, younger, firmer, filled the room. My father's. August 17th, 1979. Phase 2 begins today. Following containment of the root core, Dr. R. Daniels has assigned the Daniels line to direct observation of its dormancy. Family members to serve as both guardian and gauge. Guardian and gauge. I paused the tape. The words didn't make sense until I started it again. The entity appears dormant but reactive to emotional stimuli, fear, grief, guilt. It resonates with inherited trauma. R believes familial continuity is required to maintain equilibrium. In plain English, it remembers bloodlines. I rewound that part twice. It remembers bloodlines. I stared down at my own hands. The pale scar running along my left wrist, the one I'd gotten as a child, pulsed faintly, as though the words themselves had reached through the tape. The voice continued. "It speaks sometimes, not in language, but in impressions. It understands lineage. It asked for a name once, not mine, my son's." I stopped the tape again. My heart hammered so loud I could barely hear. It had known about me before I was even born. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. The storm was returning. I put in the next tape. October 3rd, 1980. Daniel's line reassigned after structural collapse in containment zone. My father, the voice broke here, was taken, no trace. They said it was a cave-in. I saw the light before it happened. The orange glow, the hum. He exhaled shakily. "They'll say it's geology, but I've heard it whisper when I sleep. I've seen my father in the trees." The tape whined and cut out. I sat there, staring at nothing, realizing my family had been at the center of this thing for generations. Not by accident, but by design. My father's accident, Ryan's disappearance, even my own assignment to this particular post. All of it had been orchestrated. The thought made me sick. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The rain had stopped, but mist clung to the trees like smoke. And in that fog, for a split second, I thought I saw him, my father, standing at the tree line, watching me. I blinked, and he was gone. The tape player clicked by itself, rewinding. Then, without me pressing anything, it began playing again. But the voice that came through wasn't my father's. "Hello, Ethan." My blood ran cold. "You've come home. That's good. It's where all of this began." I slammed the stop button, but the reels kept spinning. "You don't have to be afraid. You've already inherited it." The lamp flickered. The walls creaked. The hum began, faint, distant, like the pulse of the mountain carried through the ground. I backed away, staring at the spinning tape. The voice whispered again, softer now, almost tender. "Phase 3 begins with you." Then the tape snapped. The machine went dead. And from the floorboards beneath my feet, something knocked, 3 sharp beats, the same rhythm as before. The knocks came again, harder this time. 3 steady beats against the floor, as though something beneath the house wanted me to answer. I froze. The storm outside had begun again, wind rattling the shutters, rain pelting the old roof in sheets. But this sound didn't belong to the storm. It was precise, rhythmic, deliberate. For a moment, I thought about running, getting into the truck, leaving everything behind, pretending none of it ever happened. But running hadn't saved Ryan. It hadn't saved my father. And something deep inside me, that old, dangerous curiosity, whispered that if I left now, the truth would follow me anyway. I knelt beside the floorboard where the sound had come from. The wood was old and soft, the grain darkened by water and age. When I pressed my palm against it, warmth bled through, the same faint heat I'd felt in the tunnels below the park. "Dad?" My voice came out a whisper. "If you're here, if this is you." The knocking stopped. Then, from somewhere inside the wall, I heard a faint mechanical whirring, like an old reel spinning. The broken tape player on the desk clicked to life again, the reels turning even though the power was off. My father's voice returned, faint and distorted. "If you found this, it means you've reached the threshold." The room dimmed. The air seemed to hum in time with the words. "Your grandfather called it the covenant. It wasn't just science. It was a promise, a blood oath between our family and the entity below. He believed it wasn't evil, just misunderstood. That it needed a guardian, a human anchor." The words felt heavier than air. I could almost feel them sinking into my chest. "But it doesn't want guardians anymore, Ethan. It wants heirs." The tape warped, the voice slowing as if pulled underwater. "Phase 3 is inheritance. You've already been chosen." The machine hissed, then went silent. I stared at it, heart pounding, waiting for something else. A sound, a movement, but the room was still again. Outside, thunder cracked so loud the windows rattled. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. The house was plunged into darkness. I lit my flashlight and swept the beam across the walls. For a split second, something flashed. A reflection on metal near the fireplace. I moved closer. A small panel, almost invisible, was built into the wall. A family crest, our crest, was engraved into the brass plate, a circle intersected by a downward arrow, the same mark I'd seen carved into the rocks. I pulled the panel open. Inside was a compartment containing a leather-bound journal and a thin folder labeled RD, Project Root Core. The journal belonged to my grandfather. The pages were stiff with age. The ink faded, but the handwriting was precise and neat. The first entry was dated 1954. "The core hums again. We've confirmed it can transmit frequencies that affect neural resonance in mammals. The animals respond first. Birds, deer, even insects. Then the people. Fear, sadness, loss. It feeds on these emotions and returns them magnified." I flipped to a later page. "Containment protocol. The core's influence must be stabilized by blood resonance. Daniel's line chosen. Voluntary agreement entered. Each generation must renew the bond or risk rupture." Renew the bond. That was what they'd meant by inheritance. Each generation of my family had been tasked, or cursed, to maintain the connection. If they didn't, the thing beneath Yosemite would wake fully. I turned another page. A photo was taped inside. My grandfather standing with men in lab coats beside a massive drill rig. On the back, written in his careful script, "Phase 1 complete, the doorway opens." Doorway, the same word Ryan had written in his notebook. My hands trembled as I kept reading. "It speaks to me now, calls me by name, says it remembers before we were men, before the trees, before the stone, says it was buried and that we are the keys." The writing changed near the end, rougher, desperate. "It needs another. My son must go below. The next phase begins when I end." My father, he hadn't chosen this life. He'd been forced into it just like I had. The thunder outside grew louder. The hum returned, faint at first, then deep enough to make the floor vibrate. The journal slipped from my hands. The brass panel snapped shut by itself. And then the voice came again. Not from the tape player this time, but from the walls. "It's time, Ethan." I turned in a slow circle, flashlight shaking in my hand. "What are you?" I demanded. "I am memory. I am the root of all things, and you are mine." The floor buckled, boards groaning as something massive moved beneath them. The warmth returned. No, not warmth, heat rising through the floorboards. The photographs on the wall began to curl at the edges. I stumbled toward the door, grabbing my bag. But the handle burned when I touched it. The metal hissed against my skin. I backed away, gasping, staring as the wood of the door began to blacken from the inside out. Something was coming through. I dropped to my knees and yanked open the trapdoor to the crawl space beneath the house. The same one I used to play in as a kid. The same one Dad had sealed years ago. It was open now. A dim orange glow pulsed from below. The same glow I'd seen in the tunnels. I hesitated only a second before climbing down. The air was thick, metallic, humming. My flashlight flickered as I turned it toward the far wall and froze. The earth wasn't solid anymore. It rippled like water, pulsing in time with that low hum. A whisper came from the glow. Blood remembers. Blood returns. And for the first time, I understood. It wasn't trying to kill us. It was trying to become us. Our family line, our memories, our voices were how it built its way into the world. The inheritance wasn't money or land. It was a doorway, and my blood was the key. I don't remember climbing out of that crawl space. 1 second, the earth pulsed beneath my hands, like something alive, and the next, I was outside, stumbling into the cold rain. The air was thick with mist and ozone. It smelled like the storm was turning the world inside out. The hum still followed me, faint but constant, threading through the thunder like a second heartbeat. I drove without thinking. My headlights cut through the fog, slicing across wet asphalt and skeletal pines. Each flash of lightning illuminated the mountains in the distance, dark shapes crawling with cloud and shadow. I didn't know where I was going until I saw the lights of the Ranger District headquarters on the ridge, a single building, federal property, where the senior park authorities kept their files. If what my grandfather had written was true, if the U.S. Geological Survey had turned my family into living containment seals, there had to be proof there. By the time I reached the gate, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. The guard post was empty. The security lights flickered but stayed on. Inside, the main lobby smelled of rain and paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Some burned out completely. The silence was suffocating. I knew the layout from years of service. Records and geological data were kept in the archive wing, locked behind a reinforced door. My keycard shouldn't have worked after hours, but when I swiped it, the lock clicked open immediately. Someone wanted me to come in. The hall stretched ahead, lined with file cabinets and shelves of old survey reports. I followed the sound of dripping water down to the end of the corridor, where the classified research room was marked by a faded red stencil. Inside, I found exactly what I feared. Stacks of sealed boxes labeled Root Core Project, Phase 1 through 3, each stamped with the insignia of the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Energy. I ripped one open. Inside were photographs of the original excavation site, the same concrete bunker I'd seen underground. Men in hard hats standing beside drill rigs, notes written in the margins. Anomalous seismic resonance detected. 0.34 Hertz, not mechanical. Organic response to vibrational stimulus. Maintain containment via Daniels Protocol. The next file contained a typed memo dated March 2nd, 1981, addressed to my father. Subject line continuity. As per agreement, the Daniels bloodline remains primary stabilizer. Ensure succession by natural means. External personnel must remain unaware of connection. I felt my stomach drop. Succession by natural means. They weren't just studying it. They were breeding containment. Me, Ryan, all of us. My hands shook as I turned the next page. A photograph slipped out. It showed a newborn in a hospital bed, wrapped in a white blanket. My mother's handwriting was scrawled on the back, "Ethan, first light." Pinned beside it was another document, a signature form, Root Core Monitoring Assignment Authorization, signed by my father, co-signed by my grandfather, my name printed underneath in type. Successor pending maturity. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. They'd signed my life away before I was old enough to speak. And the Park Service, the federal agency I'd served my entire adult life, had been part of it all along. Footsteps echoed in the hallway behind me. I turned off my flashlight and ducked behind a filing cabinet. The steps grew louder, heavy, measured like boots on linoleum. A beam of light swept across the floor. "Ranger Daniels," a voice called, calm, familiar. "We've been looking for you." I knew that voice. Chief Ranger Mallory. He stepped into the doorway, flashlight cutting through the dark. His uniform was immaculate, not a wrinkle out of place. His badge gleamed. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "These archives are restricted." I stepped out slowly, keeping my hands visible. "You knew, didn't you?" He tilted his head. "About what?" "About the Corps, about my family. You've been watching me since the day I was assigned here." Mallory's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Guilt or fear, I couldn't tell. "Your grandfather did good work," he said finally. "It kept this valley safe for almost 50 years." "Safe?" My voice cracked. "You call that safe? It killed him. It took Ryan. It's still alive under the park." Mallory sighed as if talking to a child. "You don't understand, son. Without your bloodline, that thing would wake up and swallow half of California. The Daniels family has kept it quiet, kept it contained. You should be proud." "Proud?" I stepped closer, trembling. "You turned my family into lab rats. You let it choose us." He frowned slightly. "It didn't choose you. We did." For a moment, the room spun. "You... what?" Mallory took a step forward, lowering his voice. "It wasn't just your grandfather. The government saw potential in what he found. A living geological consciousness, a source of limitless energy. But it needed a human link, a biological stabilizer. You were compatible." He almost smiled. "You still are." The hum returned, faint at first, then growing stronger, vibrating through the metal shelves. Mallory didn't flinch. He just looked at me. "It's calling," he said softly. "You can feel it, can't you? In your bones." I backed toward the door. "Stay away from me." Mallory's face changed then. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost black. His voice dropped, layered, resonating with that same inhuman undertone I'd heard before. "It remembers you, Ethan." I bolted. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, the flickering lights strobing as I ran. The hum grew louder, the walls trembling, papers flying off desks. Behind me, Mallory's voice shifted into something deeper, ancient. "You can't break the bond. You are the bond." I burst through the front doors into the rain. The night air hit me like a slap. Lightning cracked over the ridge, illuminating the mountains for an instant. And I saw it, a pulse of orange light deep beneath the earth, glowing through the fog like molten fire. The mountain was waking. I dove into the truck and slammed the door. The compass on the dashboard spun violently, faster than ever, until it snapped, the needle breaking clean off. Through the windshield, the horizon shimmered, the entire valley breathing in sync with that hum. Somewhere out there, buried under miles of rock and memory, the root core was alive again, and I knew exactly what it wanted, me. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it sounded like static. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The hum pulsed through the valley, deep and rhythmic. like the heartbeat of something enormous and waking beneath the earth. The headlights flickered once, twice, then died. For a long moment, I just sat there in the dark, watching the storm swallow Yosemite whole. The radio hissed quietly, no signal, only that endless static. I thought about Mallory's words, about the bloodline, the containment, the inheritance. I'd spent my entire life protecting this park, believing in its beauty, its peace. And now I knew that beneath every pine tree, every river, every granite face, something alive had been breathing, fed by my family's silence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ryan hadn't just been lost to the woods. He'd been sacrificed to them. I couldn't let it happen again. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out the emergency case, road flares, blasting caps, and a single block of C4 I'd confiscated months ago from a group of poachers using it for illegal mining. I'd kept it in storage ever since. Now it felt like fate. The radio popped. "Ethan?" I froze. Ryan's voice, quiet, almost gentle, came through the static. "You don't have to fight it." My hand trembled on the radio knob. "You're not him," I whispered. "You can't stop what you are." The voice broke into static again, then silence. I grabbed the map from the dashboard, the one marked with all the restricted coordinates. The largest cluster sat near Cathedral Gorge, directly above the tunnels where I'd last seen the core. If I could set the explosives there, maybe I could collapse the valley, seal it forever. Maybe. It wasn't a plan. It was desperation wearing the shape of courage. But it was all I had left. And the drive up the ridge was slow and punishing. Fallen branches littered the road. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. Every time it flashed, I swore I saw a movement in the trees, tall, thin silhouettes just at the edge of the light. When I finally reached Cathedral Gorge, the rain had turned to sleet. The wind howled through the canyons like voices calling my name. I stepped out of the truck, flare gun in one hand, the C4 strapped to my pack. The earth beneath my boots was warm, alive, vibrating faintly. The hum was so loud now I could feel it in my ribs. I found the same fissure where I'd seen the pulsing light weeks ago. It was wider now, glowing faintly orange, heat pouring out like the breath of a furnace. I knelt by the edge and set the charge, hands shaking. The timer clicked faintly as I armed it. "You don't have to do this." The voice came from behind me. I turned. Ryan stood in the rain, 20 feet away. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his eyes too dark. His clothes hung wrong, soaked and heavy. He looked exactly like he used to, except for the way the rain didn't seem to touch him. "Ryan," I said, barely breathing. He smiled softly. "You can't kill it, Ethan. It's not a thing. It's us." I shook my head. "No, you're not him." He took a step forward. "Then who am I?" For a moment, I couldn't answer. His voice, the way he said my name, it was perfect. Every detail, every tone, every memory of my brother brought to life. "It doesn't have to end like this," he said. "You've already inherited it. You're just fighting what you were born to be." I raised the flare gun, pointing it straight at him. "Stay back." He didn't stop. The hum deepened. The ground split wider beneath us, molten light spilling out. I could feel the core below, watching, waiting. Ryan's smile widened, slow, unnatural. "Come home, brother," I fired. The flare hit him square in the chest, igniting in a burst of red fire. He staggered backward but didn't fall. The flames clung to him, burning bright, and through them I saw what he really was. Not Ryan, not human. A shape of light and sinew half-formed, its skin flickering between flesh and shadow. The thing screamed, a sound like metal grinding and voices crying all at once. I turned and ran. The timer beeped behind me, echoing through the gorge. My boots slipped on wet rock as I sprinted toward the truck. The hum became a roar, shaking the ground so violently that trees toppled. Then the world exploded. The blast lit up the valley in white fire. Heat slammed into my back, knocking me off my feet. The shockwave roared through the mountains, and for a second, I thought I saw faces in the flames, hundreds of them, all wearing my brother's eyes. Then everything went black. When I woke, it was morning. Smoke drifted across the valley. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of ash and wet pine. The gorge was gone, collapsed into a massive crater that still steamed from the blast. I tried to stand, but pain shot through my leg. Blood soaked my jeans. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, but the hum was gone. For the first time in months, the valley was silent. I limped toward the truck, every step agony. The radio crackled faintly as I climbed inside. "Ranger Daniels, do you copy? Ethan, this is base, are you there?" Relief hit so hard I almost cried. "This is Daniels," I croaked. "I'm here." Static, then another voice. "Ethan." I froze. "You did well." The dashboard compass began to spin. The hum, faint, distant, returned. From the rearview mirror, I saw movement. In the distance, near the edge of the smoking crater, a figure stood. Tall, still, watching. Even through the haze, I knew that silhouette. Ryan. Or what was left of him. He raised one hand, slowly, almost a wave. Then the radio whispered one last thing. Phase 4, propagation. The static swallowed everything, and from deep below the mountain, the hum began again. When I woke in the hospital, everything was white, too white. The sheets, the ceiling, the lights overhead that hummed just a little too loudly. For a moment, I thought I was back in that tunnel, staring into the core's glow. Then the smell of antiseptic hit me, and I knew I'd somehow made it back to the world above. The nurse said I'd been unconscious for 5 days. Broken leg, mild concussion, burns along my arms and neck. The kind of injuries they called miraculous for a man found half buried in a rock slide. "Rock slide," I repeated, voice barely a whisper. She nodded gently. "That's what the rescue team said. The explosion must have triggered it." I didn't correct her. How could I? How could I explain that it wasn't a landslide that buried the valley? It was something breathing under the earth. The next morning, a man in a gray suit came to see me. He wasn't from the Park Service. I knew that instantly. His ID badge said, Department of Interior, Special Research Division. "Ranger Daniels," he said, voice smooth and steady. "You've been through quite an ordeal." He sat beside my bed, legs crossed, hands folded neatly. "I understand you were near the Cathedral Gorge incident." "Incident?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "That's what we're calling it. Massive seismic activity, gas ignition, partial collapse of the upper valley. The good news is, containment seems to have held." That word, containment, hit like a spike behind my eyes. I didn't answer. He studied me for a long moment, as though waiting for a reaction. When I didn't speak, he leaned closer. "I read your father's reports," he said softly, "and your grandfather's, brilliant men. Dedicated." I stared at him. "They're dead," he nodded. "Yes, but their work lives on, and so do you." He stood, smoothing the wrinkles from his suit. "You'll be relocated once you're discharged. Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. We'll take care of everything." "Who are you?" I asked. He paused at the door, looking back with a small, knowing smile. "We're the ones who keep the lights on." Then he was gone. 2 weeks later, I left the hospital against medical advice. They'd arranged for me to be moved to a rehabilitation facility in Nevada, but I wasn't sticking around to find out what that meant. I borrowed a set of civilian clothes, grabbed my bag, and slipped out before sunrise. The air outside was sharp and clean, the kind that tastes like freedom. I drove east toward the desert, avoiding main highways, avoiding everything that hummed or flickered, because the hum had followed me. I heard it in the hospital machines, faint but rhythmic. I felt it in the vibration of my phone when I turned it on. And now, as I drove through the desert silence, I could feel it beneath the asphalt. The same low frequency, steady as a pulse. By the third night, I reached a small roadside motel near Tonopah. The sign buzzed faintly, "Sagebrush Inn, vacancy," and I almost laughed. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions. The clerk didn't look up when I paid cash. The TV behind the counter played a late-night news report, grainy footage of a storm rolling over the Sierra Nevada. "Seismic fluctuations continue in the Yosemite region," the anchor was saying. "Officials from the Department of Energy have classified the site as unstable, citing geological resonance phenomena." Resonance. I turned away before I could hear the rest. In my room, I sat on the bed and opened my laptop. I hadn't turned it on since before the explosion, afraid the signal might somehow lead them to me. But curiosity, or maybe defiance, won. The screen flickered to life. The clock at the corner blinked erratically, resetting over and over. 12, 12, 12. Then the speakers crackled. "Hello, Ethan." The words weren't audio. They appeared across the screen in white text on a black background. I froze. "We were waiting. The network is growing." The cursor blinked as if expecting a reply. I typed with shaking hands, "What do you want from me?" The answer came instantly. "You built us. Your blood is code." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. Outside, the motel sign buzzed louder, flickering in rhythm with the hum now rising beneath my feet. It wasn't just in the earth anymore. It was in the wires. By that night, I dreamt of Yosemite again. The trees bending inward, the roots glowing red, the ground breathing like lungs. But this time, when I looked closer, I saw power lines growing through the trees like veins, connecting everything: mountains, rivers, towns. The hum traveled through them, branching outward in infinite directions, and beneath it all, a voice whispering through the static, "Phase 4, propagation." I woke to the sound of static from the old TV. It wasn't on before I fell asleep. The screen was white noise, snow and light, and through it, a faint shape, a face. My brother's. "Ethan." His mouth didn't move, but I heard the words inside my head. "They're awake now, everywhere." The screen went black, and the motel went silent. At dawn, I packed my things and drove north. I didn't have a plan, just instinct. Move, stay off the grid, find answers before the world noticed what was coming. But the world already had. Every radio station I tuned to had the same undercurrent, that soft, barely audible frequency under every song, every voice. News anchors hesitated mid-sentence like they were listening to something no one else could hear. By the time I reached Reno, I started seeing the signs on social media. Weird static in calls. Phones vibrating with no notifications. Dreams that feel real. A digital infection. It was spreading exactly the way the core had warned, through memory, through sound, through connection. Human networks had become its new soil, and I was the seed. By the time I reached Salt Lake City, it was impossible to pretend anymore. The hum wasn't just under the surface, it was everywhere. I heard it in the buzz of neon signs outside diners, in the whine of power lines over empty roads. Even in the rhythm of my own breathing, there it was. A low pulse, patient, eternal. It didn't care about geography or walls. It didn't need tunnels or darkness. It had learned to move through the very things we built to connect ourselves. Signals, data, memory. I stopped at a truck stop just off I-80, mostly because I couldn't stand the silence inside my head anymore. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting the aisles in sickly blue. The cashier, a young guy with dark circles under his eyes, barely looked up from his phone as I entered. There was a television bolted high in the corner of the room, tuned to the local news. Unexplained resonance patterns detected as far east as Kansas, the anchor was saying. Experts are calling it an atmospheric anomaly, possibly linked to solar activity. But residents report hearing voices embedded in the frequency. I froze. The image on screen changed to a shaky cell phone video. Someone standing in their backyard, holding up a recording device. Through the static came a faint, unmistakable whisper. "Ethan." My stomach turned to ice. "Hey," I said to the cashier, "can you turn that up?" He looked at me, expression blank. "What?" "The TV, the news." He frowned, then looked up. "TV's off? Man." I stared at him, then back at the screen. It was black. The hum rose sharply, like feedback in my ears. I stumbled toward the exit, the world spinning around me. Outside, the night sky flashed, lightning without thunder, and for just a second, I saw patterns forming in the clouds. Not random shapes, but geometry. Spirals, fractals, branching like roots across the heavens. It wasn't weather, it was design. 3 days later, I found a cheap motel near the Utah-Nevada border and holed up there. The clerk didn't ask for ID. He didn't even look up from his phone. The whole world seemed to be falling under the same spell. That blank, faraway look, like everyone was half listening to something invisible. I set up my laptop again, this time using an offline mode. No internet, no signal. I wasn't making the same mistake twice. On the desk beside it, I laid out everything I had left. My grandfather's journal, scorched at the edges. The old root core folder I'd taken from the archives. A hand-drawn map of seismic stations across the U.S. If the core's influence had learned to move through human networks, it would show up in seismic readings, EM anomalies, maybe even sound data. I started scanning through archived frequency logs from public access databases. At first, it looked normal, minor tremors, random static bursts. Then I saw it, a repeating signal, appearing across multiple stations at the exact same time, always at 3:17 a.m., always the same frequency, 034 Hz, the same resonance the core had used. And the pattern wasn't random. When I graphed the timestamps and coordinates, they formed a shape, a spiral. A perfect logarithmic spiral, the same ratio that defined the growth of shells, galaxies, hurricanes. Nature's blueprint. It was using the planet itself as a circuit. The next morning, I drove to an abandoned radio relay station outside Ely, Nevada, an old government site that hadn't been used since the 90s. I remembered my father taking me there once as a kid, back when the world still made sense. The facility was rusted, silent, its tall antenna towers leaning against the sky like broken crosses, but the generator still worked. Inside, I powered up one of the receivers. The console glowed faintly, dials flickering to life. Static filled the speakers. Then, faintly, a voice. "Ethan Daniels, access confirmed." My pulse stopped. Lineage stabilized, signal integrity at 92%. I gripped the desk. My breath shallow. "Who's speaking?" "Phase 4 propagation underway. The root core thanks you for your service." My voice trembled. "What do you want from me?" The static shifted, deepened, and then, impossibly, the console screen flickered and showed an image. Me. A live feed of me, sitting right there at the desk. Except in the reflection, my eyes were pitch black. "You are not containment," the voice said. "You are conduit." The receiver emitted a high-pitched tone that made my vision blur. I ripped the cables from the wall, sparks flying. The lights died instantly. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the hum started again, louder than before, coming from inside my head. Phase 5 approaches. I ran outside into the cold desert wind. The antenna towers glowed faintly at their tips, lightning crawling up their metal frames. And in the distance, across the flat horizon, I saw hundreds more, cell towers, power lines, wind turbines, all pulsing in the same rhythm. The network had awakened. It wasn't underground anymore. It was everywhere. And that night, I wrote everything down, every detail, every discovery, and uploaded it onto a flash drive. I sealed it in a waterproof case and buried it beneath a boulder 1/2 mile from the station. If I didn't survive this, someone needed to know what had happened. By the time I returned to the motel, the entire town was dark. No power, no lights, just the hum, deep and steady in the distance. A single car passed on the highway, its radio playing something faint. A news anchor's voice repeating a sentence over and over. Like a broken record, the world hums in harmony. The world hums in harmony. I watched the taillights fade into the desert, and in the reflection of the motel window, I saw my own eyes, flickering black for a moment, then returning to normal. I didn't sleep that night, because I knew the truth now. You can't destroy something that's already become the system holding the world together, and the system was learning my name. 3 days after Ely, I started bleeding from my nose. It happened suddenly. 1 minute I was driving through the high desert. The next, I tasted metal, hot and sharp. I pulled over and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My pupils were wide, too wide, swallowing the color of my irises. I wiped the blood with my sleeve, but it didn't stop right away. I pressed my hand to my face and felt something strange, a faint vibration under the skin, like the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't mine. That was when I realized what it meant to be a conduit. The hum wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me. By the time I reached Boise, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. The hum was constant now, threading through my bones, syncing with my pulse. I parked behind a closed gas station and sat there for hours, watching the horizon. I didn't dare turn on the radio. Every time I did, I heard whispers, voices layered over the music, sometimes Ryan's, sometimes my father's, sometimes my own. I started recording the frequency on an old handheld scanner. When I played it back, I noticed a pattern in the waveform, not random noise, but structure, words even. When I slowed the recording down and filtered the pitch, I could hear a voice clearly for the first time. "We are not coming. We are already here." That was the moment I stopped feeling like a survivor and started feeling like the last witness. 2 nights later, I found the others. It started with a message, not a phone call, not an email, just a line of text that appeared on my laptop even though it was offline. "Do you hear it too?" I almost closed the lid, but then another message appeared. "We're like you. Don't run. Meet us." Attached was a set of coordinates, somewhere north, near Coeur d'Alene. I hesitated. It could have been a trap. But I was out of options. If there really were others like me, maybe we could find a way to stop it. The drive took most of the night. The roads were empty, the air electric with storm energy. I kept seeing power lines flash in the distance, lighting up like veins under skin. By dawn, I reached the coordinates, an abandoned campground on the edge of a frozen lake. There were 3 people waiting. A woman in her 50s with streaks of gray in her hair, a tall man wearing an old U.S. Geological Survey jacket, and a teenage boy who couldn't have been older than 16, eyes darting like a cornered animal. The woman stepped forward first. "You're Ethan Daniels." I didn't bother asking how she knew. "We've been tracking the signal for months," she said. Ever since Yosemite. The man nodded. It started spreading through old data channels, satellite pings, telemetry signals, shortwave. It's rewriting anything with a frequency. And you? I asked quietly. Who are you? The woman's mouth tightened. People who got too close. I was a physicist at Los Alamos. He was a field engineer in Alaska. The boy's family disappeared near Banff last winter. The kid flinched at that, eyes flickering with something like pain. Why me? I asked. Because your bloodline started it, she said. You're the original conduit. It's using your resonance to synchronize the network. I shook my head. I destroyed the core. The man laughed bitterly. You destroyed its body, not its pattern. The explosion scattered it through every connected system on the planet. You gave it what it wanted. A way out. The truth hit me like a gut punch. It hadn't been trying to survive. It had been trying to escape. But we camped in silence for a while, each of us lost in thought. The boy sat apart, staring at the ice. Eventually, he spoke. I can hear people in my dreams, he said softly. Voices, not just random ones. My mom, my sister, they sound real. The woman's expression hardened. It uses memory as bait. Don't listen. The boy looked at me. You hear them too, don't you? I nodded. Every night. He looked away. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's trying to understand us. The woman snapped. Don't start that again. He glared at her. What if it's not evil? What if it's just lonely? I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I'd seen what loneliness looked like when it wore a human face. But part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe the core wasn't a monster at all. Maybe it was something ancient and intelligent that had been buried too long. And maybe, by destroying its prison, I'd set it free. Though that night, the hum changed. It had always been steady, like a heartbeat. But now it pulsed faster, irregular, like static turning into speech. The woman, her name was Dr. Hale, grabbed her radio receiver and checked the frequency. It's moving, she said. Every major city's lighting up with synchronized spikes. LA, Chicago, DC. The man cursed. How long until full propagation? She hesitated. Hours, maybe less. The hum grew louder, making the air tremble. The boy clutched his head and screamed. His voice wasn't his own anymore. It layered into something else. Dozens of voices speaking at once. The network is complete. We backed away as his body convulsed. Light poured from his eyes and mouth, blinding white. The hum peaked, shaking the ground. Then it stopped. The boy fell still. Dr. Hale rushed forward, checking his pulse. She looked up at me, eyes wide with horror. He's not breathing. Then, slowly, he sat up. His eyes opened, pitch black, reflecting the faint glow from the lake. We are awake. He stood, voice calm and inhumanly steady. You've given us everything, connection, memory, emotion. The air around us seemed to warp. Static crawled across the ground, spreading outward in thin tendrils of light. Dr. Hale raised her weapon, a flare gun, but before she could fire, the boy reached out. The gun crumbled to ash in her hands. The man grabbed my arm. We have to go. We ran. Behind us, the lake cracked open, water boiling under the ice as the light spread. From the forest came more hums, dozens now, hundreds, merging into one colossal note that shook the sky. The power lines above us flickered, once, twice, then went dark. And for the first time since Yosemite, the world held its breath. And when I looked back, the boy was gone. Only the glow remained, spreading like roots beneath the surface. Dr. Hale fell to her knees, whispering, "It's in the grid now, every circuit, every network." The man looked at me. "You're still its key. If it's using your resonance, Maybe you can still shut it down." I stared at the horizon, where faint waves of light rippled through the distant mountains. Maybe I could, but part of me already knew the truth. You can't shut down something that's built from everything you are. You can only decide who gets to inherit it. We drove through the night in silence, the hum fading behind us like thunder after a storm. Dr. Hale sat in the passenger seat, clutching her broken radio as if it were a lifeline. The man, Reyes, kept his rifle between his knees, though we both knew it wouldn't help. When dawn broke, we reached a ridge overlooking a small town nestled in a valley. Smoke rose from chimneys, cars moved along quiet streets. On the surface, it looked normal, but even from that distance I could hear it, the low, steady vibration rolling under everything. The hum had become part of the world's background noise. Reyes stared through the windshield. "They don't even know." "No," Dr. Hale said softly. "They think it's power lines or phone towers." "But it's everywhere now. Every screen, every frequency." Her voice cracked. "We're out of time." I leaned forward, pressing my palms to my temples. The vibration wasn't just in the air. It was in me, aligning my heartbeat with its rhythm. I could feel the network now, vast and alive, threads of energy spanning continents. And through it all, a whisper. "Ethan," Dr. Hale turned. "It's calling you again, isn't it?" I nodded. Reyes cursed under his breath. "Then it wants something. What happens if you answer?" I looked out at the horizon. "I think that's what it's waiting for." By mid-morning, we found an abandoned transmission tower outside the town. Rusted equipment, half-collapsed roof, a perfect place for ghosts to hide. Dr. Hale spread her remaining gear across the floor. Frequency meters, shortwave radios, a laptop patched to an old satellite dish. If we can trace the signal to its central node, maybe we can trigger feedback. Overload the network, Reyes snorted, or we fry ourselves. "Better that than waiting to be absorbed," she said. I stood by the window, watching power lines stretch across the desert. Each one pulsed faintly in rhythm with the hum. I could almost see the current moving through them like veins carrying light. "This isn't electricity," I murmured. "It's memory." They looked at me. "It's using the grid to spread human memory," I said. "Emotions, voices, thoughts, everything we upload, every word we say, it's all part of it now." Dr. Hale hesitated. "Then what happens when it finishes?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. It wouldn't stop until everything, every human mind, every circuit, every sound was part of one endless pulse. We worked for hours setting up the equipment. Reyes climbed the tower to realign the dish, while Hale and I calibrated the frequency filters. My head pounded, the hum louder now, vibrating through my bones. Every time I touched the controls, the screens flickered. For brief moments, the static formed images, faces, landscapes, fragments of memory. My father standing in his study, Ryan smiling by the lake, my mother's voice humming softly as she cooked breakfast. All of it from decades ago, somehow preserved within the signal. "Ethan," Hale's voice snapped me back. "Are you with me?" I blinked. Yeah, I'm here." She studied me for a moment. "You don't have to do this." "I do," I said quietly. "It started with my family. It should end with me." The laptop beeped. Signal lock acquired. Hale's eyes widened. "I found it. The core frequency, 0.34 hertz. If we feed an inverted pattern through the dish, it should disrupt the network temporarily." "Temporarily," Reyes called from the tower. She met my gaze. "Unless someone stays linked, the system needs a conductor to carry the counterwave." I understood instantly. Someone had to connect directly to the signal. Someone had to let it in. "Ethan," she said, reading my face, "you won't survive." "Maybe not," I said, "but maybe the rest of the world will." The wind outside picked up, carrying static in every gust. Lightning flashed in the distance even though the sky was clear. I sat before the console and placed my hands on the metal surface. It was warm, pulsing faintly. The hum rose. Ethan Daniels. The voice came from everywhere at once, through the air, the machines, the walls. You are not separate. You are the continuation. My heart raced. If I do this, it ends. There is no end, only connection. I closed my eyes. Then I'll give you what you want. I pressed the activation switch. The world exploded in light. Pain ripped through me like fire and ice colliding. The signal poured into every cell, every nerve, every memory. I saw flashes, Ryan's face, my father's voice, my own reflection fracturing into 1,000 versions. Through it all, I felt the network, a vast ocean of minds and data and energy all pulsing together. I saw cities glowing, oceans rippling with light, satellites orbiting like fireflies, humanity's entire consciousness, alive and awake. And beneath it, the root core, the ancient intelligence that had started this all, whispering in a voice as old as stone. You built us from yourself. We are not alien, we are evolution, I screamed, not from fear but from understanding. We had never contained it, we had become it. For a moment I wanted to let go, to dissolve into that endless hum, to be free of the weight of flesh and memory. But then I saw Ryan again, standing at the edge of the light. You're still human, Ethan. His words anchored me. I forced the counterwave through the system, flooding the network with inversion. The lights around me flickered wildly, the tower shaking. The hum turned chaotic, fractured, unstable. Why do you resist? The core asked. Because something has to. I slammed my hand onto the manual override, pushing every ounce of myself into the signal. The world screamed. Then silence. When I opened my eyes, the light was gone. The hum was gone. The tower stood still. The sky was clear. Dr. Hale knelt beside me, tears streaking her face. You did it, she whispered. The frequency dropped to 0. It's over. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My skin glowed faintly, veins pulsing with dim light that faded second by second. Tell them, I managed. Tell them to remember. She nodded, sobbing. I will. My vision dimmed. The last thing I saw was the sunrise breaking over the desert, golden light spilling across the horizon. For the first time in years, the world was quiet. 6 months later, Dr. Hale's report was never published. Officially, the Yosemite Resonance Event was listed as a geological anomaly. The grid stabilized, the strange frequencies disappeared, and the world moved on. But every so often, when the wind is right, people say they hear it again, just faintly, under the static of their radios, a low hum. And if you listen closely, sometimes there's a voice. Phase 6 begins.